listening to the radio. It's a strange thing, isn't it? To think that something as simple as a radio could connect us, no matter what's going on out there. But here we are. I don't know how you're hearing this, but if you are, you're one of the lucky ones. Or maybe not. Maybe it's better not to be hearing this at all. I know it's hard to believe, but what I'm telling you is real. This isn't some story or some movie. No, this is happening right now, all around you. If you can hear my voice, it means you've managed to hold onto something, anything, in a world that's slipping away by the second. The sky. Well, the sky was the first sign. At first, we thought it was just a freak storm. A few extra clouds. The air was thick with moisture. You know the drill. People on the streets grumbled about the forecast. It'll blow over, they said. I even heard one guy joke, we'll just get some more rain, right? But no, that's not how it went. It wasn't rain. Not at first. It was the oceans, rising, fast. The first wave hit on the coast of Southeast Asia. I don't know if you saw the footage. By now, most of you have probably seen it. Waves cresting higher than skyscrapers, swallowing entire towns whole. People thought it was just a freak occurrence, but the thing is, it didn't stop. That's what got people freaked out. It wasn't a one-off disaster. That first flood was just the beginning. Then came the silence. The kind of silence that presses in on you. The kind where you can't even hear the sound of your own breath. The ocean, relentless, kept pushing further, inland. First, the coastal cities, then the farmlands. And now it's reaching the heart of the land itself. I can't describe what it's like to watch something you thought was permanent, something you trusted, like the ground beneath you, just disappear. I've heard people screaming, voices fading beneath the water's surface, reaching out for each other in the darkness, only to be swallowed whole. It's a sound that cuts through your soul, a scream of finality. And you want to know the worst part? It's happening slow enough for people to realize it, but not fast enough to escape it. And it's spreading. The scientists, the meteorologists, they've all been talking about the oceanic surge, the tidal spike. But no one really understood what it meant. No one understood that the ocean wouldn't stop. I know some of you might be wondering, why is this happening? You've probably heard the theories. Some say it's climate change, rising temperatures, melting glaciers. Others say it's something more sinister, something we don't fully understand. All I know is the oceans are pushing up, as if they've decided that we, the people, were never meant to stand here. I can hear you now. You're probably asking yourself, wait, where do we go from here? The truth is, nobody knows. Nobody. Some people think they can outrun it. Head to the mountains, find higher ground. But the mountains aren't going to save us. There's no place left to run, and that's the hard truth. Right now, the cities are gone. I don't mean partially flooded. I mean gone. If you're in a coastal city right now, well, I'm sorry to say, the ocean has already claimed it. No one's left to tell the story. I've been listening to reports all day, and every single one of them starts the same way. People shouting, desperate to get to safety. Boats packed with people. No more room, no more food. The engine's barely working. I heard a woman this morning. She had her 2 kids with her. She said the boat was barely keeping afloat. She kept asking, where are we going? Where can we go? She didn't get an answer. No one did. If you're still here with me, wherever you are, just know this. You're not alone. You've still got me, and I've got you. We're all in this together now, aren't we? There's a city out there. What's left of it? I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The buildings are half sunk, and the people who stayed behind, well, they're stuck. Some have gone up into the hills. Others, well, the ones who did make it are in the water now. The water doesn't care, it never did. The question I've been asking myself, and maybe you've asked it too, is simple. How did it all go wrong so fast? We're just people. We're not supposed to be helpless in the face of something like this, are we? I mean, we're supposed to be smart enough to solve this, right? We've got technology, science, all these things we've used to conquer the world. And now the world is drowning. I don't have all the answers, but I'll tell you this. We're in it now. There's no turning back. In the distance, I hear the sound of waves crashing. That's all that's left to hear now. I'm going to keep talking. If you're hearing this, you're not alone. If there's any signal out there, I'll find it, and I'll keep reaching out. But you've got to listen. Stay with me, and we'll keep each other company. Right now, we've got to hold on to whatever we can. Okay, we're still here. Still fighting to keep this line open. If you're listening, I hope you're safe. But I'm not sure anyone can say that anymore, are they? The truth is, I'm hearing more and more stories from people who didn't make it out. Families stuck in the wreckage of what used to be their homes. Cities half submerged with no way to escape. The boats, the lifeboats, they're all full. I heard this one man, his voice shaking as he spoke. I don't even know where we're going anymore. Just away. Away from what? From this? From everything we thought we knew? It's hard to even picture what's happening, isn't it? To try to grasp the scale of it. You see, at first, the flooding was just a problem for the coastal cities. But now the oceans are creeping inland, moving like a slow but steady avalanche. The water's already hit some of the world's biggest cities. I don't even know how many people are left in places like New York, London, Tokyo. The reports I'm getting, they're incomplete. Too many systems have gone down. Power grids are fried, satellites are offline, and communications are spotty at best. Some places are completely in the dark. Others are flooded beyond recognition. But I'm not here to talk about the devastation. Not really. You've heard that before, seen it on the news. What I want to tell you about, what I need you to hear, are the stories of the people, the survivors, those who are still clinging to hope, even as the tides rise higher, even as they watch everything they've known vanish beneath the waves. There's a family in what used to be Miami. Let me tell you about them. They didn't leave when the storm hit. They didn't believe it was really happening, you know? Not until the water started creeping in, inch by inch, until it was at their doorstep. And then it was too late. The man I spoke with, his name was Marcos, told me they took to the attic with nothing but a flashlight and a few bags of rice. We thought we'd be fine, he said. But there's only so much an attic can hold. He had a wife, 2 young daughters, and for 3 days they sat there in the dark, the sound of the water rising, louder and louder. They got out, in the end, just barely. Marcos found a boat, a small fishing boat, and he somehow managed to get them out before the house was completely swallowed. But it wasn't easy. And they're not safe yet. They're still out there somewhere, drifting in the open ocean, hoping to find any sign of land. It's not just the big cities, though. It's everywhere. I spoke to a group of people from what used to be a small town in Texas. They thought they had it all figured out. They built walls, barricades, gathered supplies. But when the water came, it came fast. What were they supposed to do when the very ground they were standing on started to sink? You can't outrun the ocean. No one can. And then there's the hospitals. I've heard from a few doctors and nurses who are still trying to hold things together. I spoke to a woman in a hospital in Chicago. She said the power went out and they couldn't even keep the equipment running. The lights flickered, went out completely, and the backup generators failed. She was trying to save lives with nothing but a flashlight and a trembling hand. She said it's the hardest thing she's ever had to do. Watching her patients knowing there's nothing she can do. They had to move patients to the roof, to whatever dry ground was left. But it wasn't enough. They didn't make it. And for every person I talk to, there's another I don't hear from. Not everyone's as lucky as the ones I've been able to reach. People are getting lost in the flood, disappearing without a trace. There's no time to stop and look for them, no time to mourn. Everyone is just trying to survive, trying to keep moving. The thing that strikes me the most, though, is how people are changing. I don't mean physically, though. Hell, that's happening too. People are getting sick, exhausted, malnourished. But I'm talking about something deeper. The way they're looking at each other. The fear, sure, but also this kind of quiet determination. I've been hearing a lot of it. People talking about what they'll do when they find safe ground. The things they'll build. The things they'll protect. And yet there's always a catch. There's always a weight that comes with the hope. You hear someone talk about rebuilding, and it sounds like a promise, doesn't it? Like there's a future there. But then you think about the water, about the miles of ocean still pushing inland, and you start to wonder, is it worth it? Is there even enough left to rebuild? Right now, we're all just scrambling. If you're still safe, still on dry land, you're a part of a dwindling minority. For most of us, it's just about surviving the next hour, the next day, trying to hold on to anything that makes us human in a world that feels less and less like one. But we're survivors, and you know what they say, right? The hardest part is always just before the dawn. And there's a part of me that holds on to that maybe we'll find something, someone, somewhere, who knows how to turn this around. But for now, we have to take it one step at a time, one moment at a time, and hold on to whatever hope we have left. I hear the wind picking up outside. There's a storm coming. It might be nothing, or it might be everything. Either way, we've got to stay sharp. Stay aware. Don't let the darkness swallow you whole. If you're hearing this, I know what you're thinking. Is it going to get worse? And, well, I hate to say it, but yeah, it's getting worse. The world, our world, is slowly slipping away. You're probably sitting there wondering how things could get worse when they already seem so bad. I get it. It feels like we're past the point of no return, like the floodgates are open, and there's nothing left to do but ride the wave. But here's the thing. I've been talking to people who still have some kind of hope left. They're saying things like, "What? We'll find a way," or "There has to be a way out." But here's the cold truth. There isn't. At least not in the way we thought. Let me break it down for you. It's not just the cities. It's not just the coastlines anymore. The ocean, this living, breathing thing that's always been, well, there. It's spreading. And it's not just rising. It's expanding. And fast. Scientists used to talk about climate models, you know? They said we'd have more frequent storms, higher tides, coastal erosion. But this isn't like anything they predicted. They said the oceans would rise by maybe 3 feet in the next century. Tops. Now, we're talking about meters. And we're talking about it happening in a span of just months. If you're on the coast, you know what I'm talking about. You saw the warning signs before they got buried by the waves. People tried to evacuate, tried to flee, but not enough. The first cities, those are gone. New York, London, Tokyo, their skyscrapers half sunken, their streets now just riverbeds. The floodwater didn't stop at the shore, didn't care about the borderlines. It just kept coming, rolling in like it had a mind of its own. What I'm hearing from people now, the ones who are still on the move, still looking for refuge, is that no one saw it coming. They didn't expect the earth itself to shift, the tectonic plates to stir like this. But they have. Everything's in motion. Scientists say it's likely because of volcanic activity under the sea, earthquakes, a combination of things. Not one or two coastal cities, but the entire system is collapsing. The oceans are not just rising, They're being pulled up by forces we don't even fully understand. It's like the Earth itself is reprogramming itself. The weather's been chaotic, the seasons are all wrong, the crops are failing, and the migration patterns of animals have gone haywire. The sea creatures, they're heading for higher ground too. But the thing that worries me the most, the governments don't know how to respond. There's no more aid coming from the big world powers. You're not going to see helicopters dropping food from the sky anymore. That's a thing of the past. The governments, the leaders, they don't have any answers. They're just as lost as we are. They've called it a global emergency. But what does that even mean? When the whole globe is drowning, when the oceans don't care about your borders or your politics, when a country's capital is now under 30 feet of water and the people left are, well, let's face it, fighting for survival. I've heard whispers about underground bunkers, about safe zones up in the mountains or deep in the wilderness. But do you really think those places are untouched? I've heard about towns up in the Alps, people who thought they could escape the chaos. But guess what? The snow is melting at alarming rates. The higher the ground, the more unstable it gets. And don't even get me started on the Amazon. I heard today that the rainforests are already being overtaken by rising waters. The very places we thought would survive, they're gone too. It's hard not to think that maybe we, all of us, are just too late. Too late to stop it, too late to save anything. And here's something else. Have you seen the boats? The makeshift rafts people are throwing together? They're barely holding together. I've heard of entire families crammed into tiny boats, everyone in a panic trying to outrun the tide. And some people aren't even trying to run anymore. They're just trying to float, waiting for something to happen, some kind of miracle to pull them out of this nightmare. I know it's hard to imagine, hard to believe that this is real, but it's happening. It's happening now to people just like you and me. I've heard stories about people still trying to get into shelters, places that were supposed to be safe. But now they're overcrowded too. There's not enough room for everyone, not enough food, not enough space to breathe. The sick, the elderly, they're the first ones to be left behind. I've spoken to people who've lost loved ones already. A woman in San Francisco, she said her husband disappeared after the first wave. She couldn't find him, not even after the water had receded a little. He was swept away, gone without a trace. I talked to a father who was searching for his son in what used to be the Bronx. He'd been calling out for hours, but all he heard was the sound of rushing water. And it's not just happening here in the U.S. I spoke to a group of refugees from the Philippines. They said their island, what used to be their home, was unrecognizable. The waters came in, no warning, no mercy. Families split apart, children lost. The elderly, well, you know what happens to the elderly when survival is a race against time. I know it feels like the walls are closing in, but here's something you need to hear. It's not over yet. People are still out there, still fighting, still surviving. They're not giving up, and we can't either. We've got one another, and no matter how bad it gets, I swear, we keep fighting. There's got to be something left. I know you're still listening, but I want you to hear me right now because what I'm about to say, it matters. It matters a lot. We've been talking about the ocean, about the floods, about the cities falling and the people fleeing. But there's something that's even harder to talk about than that. It's what happens to a person when they've been fighting this long and they start to break. The fear sets in and it never leaves. I've been hearing from people like you, I'm sure, who've been through it, who've seen their homes swallowed, who've watched the people they love get lost in the floodwaters, and they're not the same, not in the way you'd expect. They don't come back from this, not fully. I've been talking to survivors for days now, and what they keep telling me, it's not just about the fight for food or water or even shelter anymore. It's the grief. That's the thing that's slowly breaking people. It's the quiet despair that builds up when you've seen so much loss and there's nothing left to hold on to. And it's hitting harder than anything else. Take Maria, for example. She was a nurse in Miami. She sent me a message this morning. It was short, a voice message, just a few words, but you could hear it in her voice. We're not making it, she said, and then nothing. She didn't elaborate. I haven't heard from her since, but she's not alone. Everywhere I look, people are changing. And I don't mean physically. I mean deep inside, in their souls. You'd think a person would just get tired, right? Maybe a little desperate, but no, it's something worse. It's the kind of exhaustion that sinks into your bones, that buries your heart under the weight of everything that's been lost. It's like walking through a fog, where you can see everything around you, but you can't feel it anymore. Like you're just going through the motions, and that's the danger of it. You stop seeing hope. You stop seeing the future. You stop thinking about what comes next because, well, who can? When you look around, and all you see is water and darkness and people whose eyes are hollow with the same questions you have, it's hard to believe anything can change. I spoke to a woman in Boston last night. She didn't have much to say, just that she was waiting. Waiting for what, exactly? She didn't know. And that's the thing. We're all just waiting. But the waiting, it wears you down. It's like being stuck in a dream where you know it's all falling apart, but you can't wake up. Now, I don't want to make it sound like there's no hope left. I'm not saying that. But let me tell you this. There's a difference between surviving and living. And right now, surviving is the only thing people can think about. No one's planning for the future. Not when the future feels like it's already been swallowed. I've heard a lot of people say that they're just taking it one day at a time. And that's all you can really do. I mean, if you're out there on your own, or maybe with a group of people, you're probably thinking the same thing. What now? What can we do? And the answer's simple. You survive. You keep going. But there's a cost. I know you're tired. You might be sitting in your shelter or hiding out somewhere, wondering if there's even a point to it anymore. And I'm here to tell you that I get it. But you need to understand, you're not weak. It's okay to feel like you've hit a wall. It's okay to feel like giving up because that's exactly what the floodwaters want. They want you to feel like you're sinking, like there's no way out. They want to pull you under. But don't let them, because this is the part where it gets hard. The part where we stop being survivors and start becoming something else. Something we're going to need to get through this. I don't know what that something is yet, but I know we can't do it alone. I talked to a group of refugees this morning, people who had been living out of makeshift tents along the banks of a river for weeks. They said something that stuck with me. One of them, an older man, he looked like he'd been through hell and back. He said, "You can't just survive, you've got to keep your mind. If you lose your mind, you're lost." And that's what I want to tell you right now. Keep your mind. Don't let the despair take it from you. Don't let the isolation break you. The human spirit can take a lot, but it has limits. And we're all nearing those limits. I wish I could tell you things are going to get better. But the truth is, I don't know. What I do know is this. Every day, you're still standing. Every day, you're still holding on. That matters. I know it's hard to see that right now. The water's rising, the sky's dark, and the future feels like a distant memory. But you're here. You're listening. That means you're still fighting. And that fight, it's what keeps us human. It's what keeps us going. I know what you're probably thinking right now. After everything we've been through, after hearing about all the loss and all the despair. You're wondering, is there anything left worth fighting for? I get it. You've seen what the ocean's done. You've watched the world break apart. It feels like it's just too much to take in, too much to process. It's easier to sit back and let the waves drown everything out, to lose hope and wait for the end. But listen, there's something happening out there, something small but significant. People are fighting back, not with grand plans or miracles, but with each other. I've been talking to survivors who are starting to come together, forming small communities. You wouldn't believe how much that matters. You'd think, after all this, that people would turn inward, try to save themselves at all costs, but no. There's something about this kind of disaster that's also sparking something else. Connection. And that's the thing I've been hearing more and more of these days. I spoke to a woman in what's left of Kansas City today. Her name's Jenna. She's been working with a group of survivors, most of them strangers at first. They were all scattered around trying to find food, water, shelter. She said it wasn't pretty. At first, they fought over the scraps. There was a lot of fear and distrust. Everyone was looking out for themselves, and it was every man for himself. But something changed. She said one night the storms hit harder than they'd ever seen. The winds were howling, trees were snapping, and they thought they'd lose everything. That was when a small group of them, just 5 people, got together. They decided to help each other. Jenna and her group pooled their remaining supplies, what little they had left, and made it through the night. And after that, they made a pact, a promise to stay together no matter what. Jenna's message to me wasn't long, but it was enough. It's not much, but we've got each other. That's all we need right now. And she's right. That's the thing. In a world that's crumbling, when the ocean's swallowing everything around you, it's the people you have beside you that make the difference. It's the strength of small, local communities that can change everything. I heard about a group in Northern California. They've taken shelter in an old high school. It's not a palace, not even close. The building's barely standing, but they've managed to get a few of the classrooms functional. They've converted the gymnasium into a kitchen, and some of the classrooms have turned into makeshift hospitals. The thing is, they're surviving. They're surviving because they're working together. One guy used to be a mechanic. He's fixed up old generators to keep the lights on. A nurse from Chicago, she's been keeping the wounded alive with just basic supplies. And a teacher, believe it or not, she's been running learning groups for the kids, trying to give them some sense of normalcy. It's not perfect, far from it, but they're holding their ground. In other places, people have started doing something they thought was impossible, growing food. It's hard to believe when everything's flooded, when you're standing knee-deep in water. But in the hills of Tennessee, a group of survivors started building makeshift greenhouses out of whatever they could find. Plastic sheeting, scrap metal, old furniture, and they've managed to start growing crops. It's a small thing, but it's enough to give them something to hold on to. One of the people there, a man named Mike, told me they're using candlelight to keep the plants warm at night. Can you believe that? Just candlelight. They've even got small fish tanks set up to keep the food supply growing, using whatever rainwater they can gather. It's like hope, you know? It's small, but it's there. These little victories keep us going, make us remember what it means to be alive, to fight for life. Look, I'm not saying it's all going to be okay. We've got this in the bag. I'm not that naive. But there's something to be said for community, for people banding together to do the impossible, for the fact that even when the world's falling apart, there's still someone out there who's got your back. And isn't that worth something? One of the hardest things about all of this, about the rising water and the chaos, is how lonely it can feel. You can find yourself staring out at the flood, wondering if anyone else is still out there, and sometimes you won't get an answer. Sometimes it feels like you're the last one standing, but you're not alone. And you're not just surviving. You're part of something bigger than yourself every time you reach out. Every time you help someone, even if it's just with a smile or a kind word, you're making that little victory happen. You're part of the community, and it matters. People are doing what they can, and I've heard whispers of something else, something a little bigger than just survival. Some people are already talking about what comes next, about what they'll do when the water recedes, when the storms settle, rebuilding a better world, even when the odds are against them. We're not out of this yet, not by a long shot, but those small victories, the communities coming together, the food growing, the light staying on for just a little longer, those are the things that are going to carry us through. It's not about grand gestures. It's about finding the will to keep fighting. Together. I'm telling you, we've got this. We're in this together, and we'll find a way. All right, we've been talking a lot about survival, about the human side of this catastrophe, the heartbreak, the small victories, the tight-knit communities. But now, I want to focus on something else for a moment. I'm sure you're wondering, what are the experts saying? What do the scientists know? Or at least, what are they trying to do? I've been keeping an eye on the research, on the reports coming from the last functioning scientific stations. And let me tell you, if you think they've got all the answers, you're in for a wake-up call. They don't. But here's what they do know. We're looking at something that's much bigger than anyone had anticipated. It's not just about the melting ice caps. Yeah, that's part of it, but that's not the whole story. You've probably heard the term climate change for years, right? Well, turns out it's not just change anymore. It's more like a chain reaction, a cascade of effects that we've only just begun to understand. I got in touch with a researcher over at one of the last climate study centers in what used to be California. His name's Dr. Ruben Salazar, and he's been studying ocean currents and seismic activity for decades. Dr. Salazar said something to me that stuck with me. The Earth is balancing itself, and we're not part of that balance anymore. What he's talking about is what's happening beneath the surface of the oceans. The currents, those massive rivers of water that flow through the oceans, have shifted. It's not just the heat of the waters rising, but the flow itself, the way water circulates and moves around the planet. They're calling it the Great Ocean Shift, and it's a term that doesn't quite capture the chaos, because what's happening now isn't just a warming of the oceans. It's more like the oceans are restructuring themselves. The currents are pulling warm waters where they've never been, and that's throwing everything off. Weather patterns, food sources, even the way the Earth absorbs carbon. But the worst part is that no one knows how to stop it. The oceans are too vast, too deep. Dr. Salazar told me they can't reverse the damage, at least not in any way that would save us in time. All those efforts to reduce carbon emissions, too little, too late. And the climate models, they're already outdated. The oceans are moving faster than anyone expected. But here's the kicker. There are people who are trying. They're trying to figure out solutions to slow the process. And believe it or not, they're doing it with some pretty out there ideas. I talked to a team in Alaska who's working on something they call artificial cooling. Basically, they're experimenting with ways to cool the ocean's surface using giant floating platforms, pumping water up from deep below where it's colder. They're also looking at what they call cloud seeding, a process where you inject particles into the atmosphere to create clouds that reflect sunlight, cooling the planet a little at a time. I know it sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but right now, those crazy ideas might be the only thing standing between us and total collapse. Problem is, they're not working fast enough, and the seas keep rising. Then there's the issue of the freshwater supply. I heard from a couple of scientists in the Pacific Northwest about something called desalination. It's a process where you remove salt from seawater to make it drinkable. The technology is there. It works. But here's the problem. The amount of energy needed to run these desalination plants is staggering. And right now, most of the world's energy grids are either destroyed or inoperable. So desalination is a great idea in theory, but in practice, it's just another small solution in a sea of problems. Now, let's talk about the tectonic angle. You remember when I mentioned earlier how the rising oceans are tied to volcanic and seismic activity? Yeah, that's been happening more and more. Earthquakes, eruptions, places that were once stable are now hotspots for instability. That's throwing even more ash into the atmosphere, making things even worse for the planet's ability to regulate itself. So, instead of slowing things down, the Earth's own geological processes are accelerating the collapse. I don't want to sound like I'm throwing in the towel, but the truth is, we're kind of stuck in a race against time. And right now, Mother Nature's got the upper hand. But here's the thing, people are still trying. They're working with whatever they have left. Scrap materials, old tech, anything they can use to either survive or slow the tide. And that's why we can't stop. We can't just sit back and wait for the scientists to come up with a magic fix. No, we're part of the solution now. The communities I've been hearing from, the ones that are really holding on, they're not waiting for anyone to rescue them. They're improvising, adapting, and doing whatever they can with what's at hand. The ones who've been able to salvage power, salvage resources, they're pooling them together, making decisions as a collective. It's not perfect, not by any stretch, but I've been hearing the same message from a lot of the survivors who have banded together. We can't afford to wait for a miracle. We have to be the miracle. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. There's no guarantee any of these plans will work. The ocean's still rising and the world's not done shifting beneath us. But the fact that people are still trying, that's what gives me hope. So yeah, there are no simple answers, no quick fixes, but we're not completely powerless. We've got each other. We've got the will to survive. And maybe, just maybe, we've got the innovation to push this planet back from the brink. All right, we've made it this far. I know you're out there listening, holding on, trying to piece together what's left of the world. But here's the thing. No matter how bad it's gotten, no matter how deep the floodwaters rise, there's still a way forward. There's still a path to survival. I've been talking to survivors in all kinds of places, and one thing keeps coming up again and again. Adaptation. If we're going to make it, we're going to need to change the way we think. We're going to have to embrace a new reality, one that's different from the world we knew. First off, let's talk about shelter. For so long, we relied on buildings, on houses, on cities that were built to last for decades, maybe even centuries. But the storm has wiped that out. The floodwaters are unpredictable and the infrastructure is crumbling faster than we can repair it. So, the question becomes, how do we protect ourselves now? I've seen a lot of makeshift shelters springing up. Small communities doing what they can with what they have. They're getting creative. People in New York have started using abandoned subway tunnels for shelter. Sounds crazy, right? But it's working. The tunnels are deep enough to avoid most of the flooding, and with the right tools, they've started building out livable spaces. They've set up a kind of underground city. Basic, yes, but it's a start. It's warm. It's dry. And for now, it's safe. In places where the ground is still stable, those patches that haven't been flooded yet, people are building what they call floating communities. Picture this. Groups of people taking old boats, ships, anything that can float, and building small villages on the water. They're using the hulls of old vessels as platforms to create homes, farms, even schools. It's not ideal, but it's something. They've found ways to grow food on rafts using aquaponics. growing plants with the help of fish, using the fish waste as fertilizer. It's a kind of living ecosystem where everything is connected and working together. Now, it's not just about finding shelter, it's about sustenance. You can't survive long if you don't have enough to eat, enough to drink. This is where the real challenge begins. I heard from a guy in Seattle yesterday, and he told me something that stuck with me. We're not just surviving the flood, we're surviving the fallout of it all. And that means learning to grow, to fish, to live off the land, and the sea. In many places, people have turned to the oceans themselves for resources. There are those who've been fishing in the waters, but it's not the same anymore. Fish stocks are harder to find, and the marine life has changed. That's why people are focusing on small-scale aquaculture. They're building up these fish farms, basically underwater gardens, to ensure they've got a steady supply of food. It's a tough job, but it's the kind of thing that's keeping whole communities alive right now. Of course, not every community has access to the sea. So, what are they doing? They're turning to what's left on land. I've heard stories of people in the Midwest, places like Kansas, where it's mostly dry land and farming was once the lifeblood, now focusing on crop rotation, trying to plant what they can in the small patches of soil that are still workable. In the colder regions, people are digging deep into the earth, trying to find the seeds and plants that can survive the harsh conditions. It's tough. It's a struggle. But I've seen the same message everywhere I go. We can't stop. Because even in the face of impossible odds, the human drive to survive, to keep going, is something that refuses to be extinguished. People are planting their roots, even if it's just a small sprout, and they're watching it grow against all odds. Now, we can't ignore one harsh truth. The resources we have are running out. Water is still one of the biggest issues we're facing, and it's only getting worse. A lot of people have been relying on rainwater collection and filters, but those systems aren't foolproof, especially as the storm seasons stretch longer. That's why there's a push to recycle water, using every drop and making it last. In some of the coastal areas, they've started converting the salt water into fresh water, but again, the process is slow, and the need is growing faster than the technology can handle. So, what's next? What's the long-term plan? It's hard to say, but here's the thing, we're not giving up. Every day, there are small victories. Every day, people are finding new ways to survive, to rebuild, to hold on. The truth is, we don't know what the future holds. We don't know if the oceans will keep rising, or if the storms will get worse, or if the world we knew will ever return. But we do know this. As long as we keep moving forward, as long as we keep building, innovating, and adapting, there's a chance. And maybe that's all we can really ask for. The fact that even now, in the midst of this madness, we're still figuring it out. Together. I don't know about you, but I've got a little more fight left in me. And I know you do too. So, whatever it is you're doing right now, keep at it. The storm's not over yet, but we're still standing. We've got this. You know, I've been talking to you for hours now. Hours of stories, updates, raw truths, and moments of hope. And maybe you've heard it all before. Maybe you've heard it from others too, about the devastation, the desperate fight to survive, the world crumbling under our feet. It's easy to get caught up in all the noise, in all the chaos. But as the storm rages on and the water keeps rising, there's one thing I want you to keep with you. One thing I want you to remember as we close this broadcast, and that's this. We're still here. We're still standing. We're still trying. Every day, people are finding new ways to adapt, to survive, to live. We've had our share of losses. Some days it feels like everything is slipping away. The oceans are relentless. The storms are unforgiving. But as long as there are people who are still holding on, still dreaming of tomorrow, there's a chance. I've heard stories today that will stay with me forever. Like the father who built a raft to get his family to higher ground, refusing to give up on his children, even when the floodwaters were inches from swallowing them whole. The group of strangers in Florida who turned a shelter into a farm, planting food in the middle of a city that was half submerged, the community in New Orleans that rebuilt their neighborhood, not out of pride or for recognition, but because they knew. They had to. They had no choice. If they didn't, no one else would. And that's what we have to hold on to in the face of all this uncertainty, the fact that we have to. This isn't just about surviving anymore. It's about building something new. It's about finding meaning, even in the darkest times. I don't have all the answers. Heck, I don't even know if any of us can stop the oceans from rising. But what I do know is this: we're not finished yet. As long as we're still alive, still breathing, we've got the chance to make things right again. Now, I know it's hard to imagine a future when it feels like everything's falling apart. But I've seen something in these stories I've heard. The way people help each other, the way they find hope in the smallest things. That makes me think maybe, just maybe, we're more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. We might not be able to stop the oceans from rising, but we can rise with them. We can adapt, and we can survive, not just by looking back at the world that was, but by creating something new, something better. And that's what makes me believe in the future, even now. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I want you to think about this. What are you doing today to help the world rise again? I'm not talking about saving the entire planet in one fell swoop. I'm talking about the small things, the ways you're helping, the ways you're holding on, the ways you're building. Maybe it's finding clean water for your neighbors. Maybe it's sharing a little food. Maybe it's just taking care of the ones you love. But you're doing something. And in a world that feels like it's crumbling, that's enough. Keep fighting, keep moving, keep holding on. The waves may rise and the storm may not be over, but as long as we're together, there's still a future ahead, and that's worth everything. As we wrap up today's broadcast, I want to leave you with this thought. Despite the darkness we face, despite everything we've lost, there's still hope. We're still here. And as long as we keep moving forward, keep building, keep remembering each other, we're not truly lost. No matter what the world looks like around us, there's always something worth fighting for, always something worth remembering. So let's keep going, together. Even when things feel uncertain, remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together. We might not have the past, but we have today, and that's enough to make tomorrow worth living for. Thank you for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this broadcast, if it helped you feel connected, or maybe just a little less alone, please do me a favor. Like this video, share it with others, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything to us, and if you want to hear more of these daily broadcasts, you can also support us by clicking the join button on our channel. Every bit of your support helps us keep going, keep sharing, and keep telling the stories that matter. Until next time, keep safe, keep strong, and remember, even in the silence, we are still here. You're still here, and that's all we need to keep moving forward. See you soon.